Hello and welcome to This Is Metal with Joe Lawson. How you doing tonight, Joe?
I'm doing good, brother. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. It's great to be talking to you again. I always have fun doing these shows with you. And today, before we get started, I got to let everybody know the show we're going to do today, it's a little different from what we typically do. And all the credit goes to Joe. And that Joe and I, every time we do a show, we kind of think of, what can we do for future episodes? And Joe came up with a real cool idea. The concept for tonight is we're calling this the Axemen of Oz, which is basically all the guitar players that Ozzy Osbourne, has played with over the years. And I know, Joe, that you're really a much bigger fan of Ozzy solo years than what he did with Black Sabbath. But I think, to be fair, before we really get into the Ozzy solo stuff, we got to go back to the very beginning. And I mean, when Ozzy played with the ultimate riff master, Tony Iommi. And I was kind of curious because I haven't heard you talk much about Tony Iommi. Not that we've had that many conversations, but I was kind of curious. Where does he rate on your scale as far as guitar players?
Well, as far as guitar players, I wouldn't put him up there real high. I mean, he's not. He didn't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a great songwriter.
Yeah.
And he plays to the song, which I give him more credit for that, because I would rather hear somebody that can play and write a good song and play to what the song needs. And once again, with Black Sabbath, what we have is like a thumbprint.
Yeah.
And that thumbprint is unique. Nobody else did what those guys were doing. So they come out with this cool, epic doom metal, hard rock kind of stoner sound. Nobody had that going on, man. And to my knowledge, they didn't, at least. So they really set themselves apart from everybody else.
Yeah, and I think
and Tony Iommi deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and I think often people will credit Iommi with and Black Sabbath, but mainly Iommi, kind of creating that metal sound. They credit Sabbath, but especially Iommi, for kind of creating a whole new genre of music. I don't know if you would agree to that, because a lot of people would say, like, maybe the first time you heard any type of, like, really anything like a metal song might be even Steppenwolf's Born to be Wild. But I don't know if you're aware of it. Like, when Tony Iommi was very young, he got, like, the tips of, I think, two of his fingers cut off, and that had a lot to...
Yeah, he was in a bad accident, and right before, they were really starting to break big and things were looking really promising for him, he faced this horrible nightmare accident, and he had to go through a lot of...
rehab, I guess.
A lot of difficult...
struggles, yeah.
Adaptations to be able to do what he does, with gluing his fingertips on every night and doing the things that he did to play. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, see, that's
his passion for it is undeniable.
I think that's the point that has to...
A lot of people would have gave up, but he didn't.
I think that's the point that has to be made here. I mean, even not just way beyond creating a totally different genre of music, if you want to give him that credit, but like you're saying, I mean, some people would have given up, and a lot of people say if he had not had that accident where the tips of his fingers were cut off, that he would not play the way he does, and that that ultimate kind of metal doom sound.
Part of his sound and his tone and his playing,
and probably every metal guitar player that came after. So I just wanted to kind of start the show off with that. But now, where did you kind of become an Ozzy fan? Was it when he kind of went solo and like Blizzard of Oz first came out?
Yeah. When all that stuff was hitting big, in the 80s, I first heard it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool, and it swept me up, man. And the older I got, the more I dug into Ozzy and his catalog, and to this day, I love Ozzy and think he's had some of the best guitar players, which prompted the idea, of doing this show tonight, was because so many good guitar players have been through the ranks of Ozzy. And tonight I'm going to go through and explain in detail some of the things that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Okay,
I mean, everybody knows the classic players. Everybody knows, Randy Rhodes, Zach Wilde, and some of these names and stuff. But we're going to start from the beginning here. Let me start this off with 1977. Ozzy took a break from Sabbath, and this is what started Ozzy's career as a solo artist. Now, when he did this, he took a bunch of unknown guys And this was before Randy Rhodes.
Okay.
Dennis McCartan, Barry Dunnery, and Frank Hall.
Wow.
He had 3 guys in a band that nobody knew, a bunch of no-names, and he tried to put a band together. Didn't last very long. He fired them, got rid of them, and then ended up started, looking and started the idea of putting together his solo band for real, and then in walks Randy Rhodes. And now everybody probably knows or is familiar that Randy Rhodes was just warming up for the auditions.
Yeah.
And Ozzy heard him stumbling around drunk or whatever the case was, and was blown away by hearing him play, just warming up, and hired him on the spot without even jamming with him.
Yeah.
So that put Ozzy's career into overdrive. That really kicked off a really solid start for Ozzy with the Blizzard of Oz album and Diary of a Madman. Now, those 2 albums are probably arguably some of his best work and his most popular work as a solo artist.
Now, let me ask you...
It left a blueprint for heavy metal guitar players in the 80s and 90s because Randy just came by and just blew everybody's minds.
Now let me ask you, Joe, a couple questions before we move on. Now, in regards to once he starts to put together the Blizzard of Oz band, how smart of it do you think it was? I mean, he could have taken 2 approaches. The approach he did, which is let's kind of try to find this kind of unknown, guitar whiz kid, or he could have also chosen to go with more of a name player, somebody that's already well known within the musical ranks. I mean, what do you think about the approach he took?
Well, fate has a funny way of working itself out because I don't think Ozzy could have possibly planned that out.
Yeah.
I mean, it just so happened to be that this amazing virtuoso 20-year-old guitar player showed up, wanting to get the gig, and he happened to be there at the right place at the right time, and Ozzy heard him, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and
thank God it is, because, to this day, the Randy Rhodes era stuff is just, we've talked about this before, and I don't want to go overboard with it, but, to reiterate that, I mean, year after year after year for decades, guitar players have been inspired by Randy's playing, and I think that will continue, honestly, I really do.
Oh, yeah.
And, so with huge shoes to fill, now after Randy passed, in stepped Bernie Tormey.
Yeah.
He was hired by the label Jet Records to fill in the lead guitar spot for Ozzy. But he had a real bluesy style, it was kind of different, and things weren't really gelling really good.
Trivia question here, Joe. Do you know before Bernie Tormey filled in for Randy there, do you know what band he played with before?
Gosh.
Okay. I'm not surprised, but just for any of you trivia buffs, probably thing he was best known for prior to working with Ozzy was probably playing in Ian Gillen's solo band. Ian Gillen, for any of you who don't know, Deep Purple singer's solo band.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
But so not a lot of people probably know that, and that's a good one to bring up because, like I said, everybody knows all the classic guys and the big names and stuff, but there were some really good guitar players, and Bernie was a good guitar player in his own right. It just wasn't a really good fit, seemingly. So,
and then I think, too, with Bernie Tormey...
Bernie passed away on March 17, 2019.
Yeah, and I think, too, with Bernie Tormey, I mean, if you're an Ozzy fan, you always heard that name over the years. Probably, honestly, though, if you put a picture of Bernie Tormey in front of most Ozzy fans, they wouldn't know what the guy looked like.
Right.
He was, I think, he had a lot bigger of a fan base, being from England, throughout Europe, so he's a little more well-known in Europe than he is here in the U.S., but he definitely kind of, he had his mark in Ozzy's era because he filled in for those shows he did.
Right, exactly. So now after Bernie had departed, Ozzy brought in Brad Gillis from the band Night Ranger.
Of course, yeah.
And this wasn't a long-lasting relationship either, but at least Brad Gillis's work can be heard on Speak of the Devil, 1982 live album Speak of the Devil.
And I think that's
so he did record some live stuff while he was playing with Ozzy.
And I think that's a real collector's item now, because I think it's one of the few Ozzy solo releases that has been out of print for several years. And I don't know if you know this. I don't have it, unfortunately, but I've heard some of the tracks.
I'm sorry, I will not sell you my copy, Jason.
Yeah, and let me ask you, Joe. At the time when it was still out there was a little bit of controversy regarding that album. Do you know why?
Something to do with the labels, the commitment. He was supposed to put another album out, I think it was, or something, and they didn't want to. There were some internal issues, and they ended up just doing this live album.
And I understand that a lot of it was like a lot of Black Sabbath like material, and people were like, "Why? This is supposed to be Ozzy solo. Why are you doing Black Sabbath like a Black Sabbath live album?"
It was just to fulfill label obligation, and again, I don't know all of the ins and outs.
Yeah.
Reportedly, neither party were happy, and it was just to get out of the deal.
Yeah.
Now, after Brad Gillis, did you know that George Lynch was hired to play
I'm
with
glad
Ozzy?
you brought this up, Joe. I figured you would because I know what a George Lynch fan you are, and I think I probably read the same article just within the last couple of days. So continue on there.
Yeah. So anyways, famous Dokken guitarist George Lynch was hired to play with Ozzy after Brad Gillis just announced that he was leaving the band. So George was hired to go on tour for a few months and see how things kind of worked out. But it ended up George only played on some sound checks, and he was fired after Ozzy decided to bring in Jakey Lee.
Now, you go,
George Lynch's own words, okay, here's from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
George Lynch said that he was let go because Ozzy and Sharon were looking for someone with longer hair.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate that, I was
how disgusting is that?
And just to reiterate that, I read the same article, I think, and George also mentioned the same article or interview that that he actually auditioned, I think, for Ozzy like 2 times. Once goes back to years of knowing Randy before Randy, I think, was ever in Ozzy. They knew each other from playing the LA circuit scene, and George became such good friends with Randy that he actually got a gig teaching at the school that Randy's family owned. And so they'd known each other several times. And so actually, when Randy went down to audition for the Ozzy gig as well, I guess they'd gone down to the initial audition. And obviously, Randy was picked over George. And then to further reiterate what you were just saying, I heard the other reason they went with George, if you can believe, if they went with Jakey Lee over George, was because Sharon Osbourne thought that Jake looked more like a rock star than George, or that he was better looking or something. Can you believe that?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about a time where image meant a lot more. Also.
Yeah.
So that's important to any of our younger listeners that things are very different back in the 80s than they are now. But moving forward, one of my favorite Ozzy guitarists, Jakey Lee, who, in my opinion, doesn't get enough credit. Became a solid member of the band in late '82, and he went on to record "Bark at the Moon" in '83, and then follow up with "The Ultimate Sin," and 2 great classic Ozzy albums, and the guitar playing is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I know you.
Jake's a super cool guy too.
Now, Jakey Lee is an interesting cat because he's super talented, and I don't know if you're aware of what I'm getting ready to tell you, Joe, or not, but Ozzy was like probably the biggest gig Jake had at that point as far as highest probably profile gig he had. But prior to that, he's another one of these guys that played the LA club scene for several years, and he was in several bands that went on to become quite famous in their own right. Like he played in a real early version of Rat before Warren DeMartini was ever in the band. In fact, Jakey Lee is the guy that Warren DeMartini was replaced in Rat, and then I know that he also played like in an early version of Dio when Ronnie first left Black Sabbath and went in the studio to record some stuff. And initially, Jake was the guy that he had for the band, but for one reason or another, they had a falling out.
Yeah. I knew about the Rat connection there, but interesting, very good stuff. But unfortunately, all things I guess come to an end, and Jake didn't get to put more of a stamp with Ozzy out there.
And here's part of it.
It's great that we got Bark at the Moon and The Ultimate Sin, but I would have loved to hear more albums, how those guys, how Ozzy and Jake would have progressed together.
Yeah.
I mean, if I could go back in time, I mean, that's one of the top ones right there.
Yeah, and
I would love to hear how that progression and that relationship would have ended up blossoming and growing into if those guys could put more records out together.
And here's the thing with Jake that I heard. Part of the reason it ended with Jake is like you're saying. Besides being a great guitar player, Jake was a really talented songwriter, and on both those albums, he co-wrote a lot of the hit songs. And I guess Sharon wanted him to kind of sign a contract saying that like crediting Ozzy with writing some of the stuff that he wrote and not taking as big of a piece of his songwriting royalty, and he just kind of refused to do it. And so Sharon didn't like that, and she kind of got Ozzy to say, hey, if he's not going to sign the contract, you need to get rid of him. And then at the same time, the bass player that played on The Ultimate Sin, the hit single from that album was a song called Shot in the Dark. The bass player, Phil Salson, he only played on that one album, but he wrote the big hit that was all over MTV, and that I think they tried to do the same thing because he had such a hit song on there. They wanted him to kind of sign away his songwriting rights, and he wouldn't do it. So he got let go at the same time that Jake did.
Yeah. To elaborate on that, Bark at the Moon, he completely got boned on.
Yeah.
Jake didn't get any credit for that. The Ultimate Sin, he did ended up getting some credit on that finally.
Yeah.
But yeah, that led to the breakup. But as far as the breakup goes, did you know the story behind that about Sharon taking him out for dinner?
I haven't heard that whole story, so fill us in on that. That's the part.
So Sharon took Jakey Lee out to dinner, and this was supposed to be the goodbye, farewell dinner.
Yeah.
And she couldn't bring herself to do it, and they had a nice dinner and a good chat. And after it was all said and done, he heard through the grapevine, through some of his musician friends and other people, that he was fired. He didn't even know he was fired. And so he had to call Sharon back to clear things up and find out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And she explained to him that his services would no longer be needed, and that she just couldn't gather the strength to tell him over that dinner.
Yeah, and
I know. Also, according to Jake, Sharon once again offered him a spot playing with Ozzy in 2008. But once again, Jake brought up the songwriting credits, and Sharon never called him back. Yeah,
and I know we're supposed to be talking about the Axemen of Ozzy, but to kind of further your point, I will say Sharon's a dedicated wife and manager to Ozzy, but a lot of the guys that have played with Ozzy over the years kind of said about kind of her being such a control freak. Another guy who both Ozzy and this guy Carmine Appice, a legendary drummer in his own right, has said, me and Ozzy get along all right even to this day, but it was me and it was his wife I kind of had the problem with, and her problem with Carmine was not even over songwriting or anything, but it was the fact that Carmine Appice, when he joined Ozzy's band, he was already like a legend in his own right, okay? And Sharon didn't want anybody who was like that had as big of a rep, that was as big as Ozzy, or had an equal, let's say, just reputation, was legendary in their own right. And Carmine's like, she had a problem that, on my off days, I was, I go into town and I'd hold these like drumathons, and I do these like, I give, drum lessons and stuff, and have people come and see it. I'd give clinics, and she didn't like the fact that I'd selling Carmine Appice merchandise and stuff, and she's like, this is Ozzy Osbourne band, not the Carmine Appice band. And so that's ultimately like why he was let go, not even because of anything he did, just that he was a musician, had an equally legendary status, been around just as long as Ozzy, so he was let go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They did a lot of hiring and firing, but and then again, probably one of the best known, most popular guitarists for Ozzy came in, Zakk Wylde in 1987.
Yeah.
And of course, Ozzy's done a lot of different stuff in albums and tours, and back and forth working with Zakk, and Zakk again is one of those guys that just. It's cool because he pays such respect and homage to Randy Rhodes, and I really dig that about him. And I also like his playing. I mean, the guy's a phenomenal guitar player.
Yeah, see, Zakk, I think...
He's just really good guitar player.
I think Zakk, Ozzy's kind of, been... Zakk has kind of been his right-hand man, and Ozzy, they have their little get-togethers, their little breakups, but they've always kept it cool among each other. And I think part of the reason for that is, unlike some of the other guys we've been talking about tonight, Zach kind of knows his place in Ozzy's band. I mean, he said over the years how great Sharon and Ozzy have been to him. He's always shown both of them, a huge amount of respect. I think, too, Zach is just a great songwriter. He's a huge talent in his own right. And he's one of those guys that he can front his own band, Black Label Society, which we can get into in a little bit. And he can be Ozzy's sideman, and he knows his place, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I don't know I've never heard anything good or bad as far as the business side of their relationship, as far as Ozzy and Zach goes. But it obviously must be good enough to get together and put out albums and do what they got to do because they keep doing it. Yeah. Zach recorded 5 studio albums with Ozzy.
Here's the thing too with that is I've been thinking today about this in prepping for the show. And I'll let you get to it, but like there's a couple of these guys that like Gus G. He did one album with Ozzy, and while he was still a member of the band, they decided to kind of let him go and bring Zach back a couple of times, and I kind of wondered about that, but again, because maybe too with the fans, that's what the fans want, and if it's about selling tickets and that, well, Zach, the fans really love Zach. Let's bring him back. That'll be a way to get the fans of a show. So I think because Zach has such a popularity among the Ozzy fans, that's part of the reason they keep bringing him back.
Yeah, I totally believe it. Quick, on a personal note, and this got some press as well, so people may have heard about it. I wasn't at this show, but my guitarist Raphael was, and he saw it. Was Zach's solo band or
Black Label?
Black Label Society. Yeah. It might have been Black Label, or it might have been before Black Label. They were playing a show here, and their drummer, I guess, had gotten pretty wasted and was messing the songs up really bad.
Wow.
And Zach just kept getting angrier and angrier, and the drummer just threw his sticks down, got up, and walked off.
Wow.
And Zach fucking lost it. He went back to where he was and beat the shit out of him. And I guess everybody kind of got to see it.
Wow. That's one that kind of got past me. I never heard about that. Wow.
Yep. That got some short press, and then you just didn't hear nothing about it. But but my guitar player actually was at that show and saw it. Yeah,
and Joe, I want to go back and to the very start of all this, because what a lot of people fail to realize is I think Ozzy made a very smart choice in Randy for his first pick, because you could have gone the route of saying, okay, this is Ozzy, the singer from Black Sabbath. We're going to get a Tony Iommi clone, a guy that plays nothing but Tony Iommi type riffs, and I think that would have been really a bad way to go, because then you're just kind of copying what you did before, and you're trying to kind of live off of that legacy. He was creating something new, and I think it's very important, because everybody, let's be honest, when it was announced Ozzy was leaving Sabbath, we didn't know Ronnie James Dio was going to be the new singer. And until that was announced, people were really thinking oh, Sabbath's over. Who the hell are they going to get to replace Ozzy? And then with Ozzy, until it was announced he was, going to go solo or whatever, people really were kind of excited. They didn't know what to expect. And the thing is, if you go back to Sabbath, like you're saying, Iommi is a great songwriter. Even Geezer Butler, people fail to realize Geezer, the bass player, he wrote a lot of those lyrics.
Geezer's the man on bass.
Yeah, and not only that, but he wrote a lot of those lyrics. People don't realize that in those early Sabbath songs. And when he met Randy, I've heard Ozzy tell the story that Randy actually sat down with him when they first met, and he taught Ozzy how to write a real song, And if you've noticed in Ozzy's solo band, not just the guitar players, everybody that's ever been in the Ozzy band, they're guys that are great songwriters. He surrounds himself with very much like we're talking with Alice Cooper,
people
that are equally talented. He's not really shy about sharing the spotlight.
Exactly. So moving on now, we go to Steve Vai.
Oh yeah.
In the mid-90s, Steve Vai was supposed to record the guitars for the Osmosis album.
Yeah.
Now there's a variety of rumors and speculation, but Vi ended up parting ways with Ozzy and didn't join the band really technically.
Yeah.
And didn't record on the Osmosis album, but that would have been pretty cool to hear as well, I think,
Yeah. And I think he did write some of the songs that appeared on there. So they gave him songwriting credit. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm willing to believe that, even at that time, Steve Vai was a very huge artist in his own right, even as a solo artist. And it may have been the type of thing where, because let's think about what other bands Steve Vai had been involved in. David Lee Roth, Frank Zappa, Whitesnake, Alcatraz, and so he was known really not just as a great guitar hero, but a great songwriter. And if you look at some of the stuff he wrote with Ozzy on Osmosis that appeared on the album, they're pretty good songs. And I think, too, maybe they realized, well, this guy, he's equally as popular as Ozzy. Maybe like same thing would happen with Carmine Appice, where we're just going to kind of decide to part, because we don't want somebody that's going to be as big as Ozzy in the band. This is Ozzy Osbourne band.
Right. So in '95, Ozzy hired Alex Skolnick of Testament on guitar, and they had a successful audition, and things went good. And Alex only ended up playing one show in Nottingham, England. And according to what Alex had to say, Ozzy was satisfied with his performance, but unfortunately Sharon was not.
And she's the final word. A lot of people say.
He was given the boot.
Wow.
95.
Wow.
Joe Holmes came into the picture, and not a lot of people really say a whole lot about this guy. And he wasn't with Ozzy for a long time, but I think he left his mark. I think he had some good, tasty riffs and some good stuff that he did for Ozzy.
Now, here's the interesting thing about that, Joe. I want to spend a little time on this because in prepping for this tonight, knowing that I was going to be calling you to do the show. I've kind of been thinking about this. He's probably, of all the guitar players in Ozzy's band, I dare say even maybe more so than Bernie Tormey, he's probably the one that we know the least amount about, or if it gets the least. Again, kind of very much like Bernie Tormey. If I saw a picture of Joe Holmes in a magazine, I don't know that I'd even know what he looks like. I mean, you would think he's probably really the one guitar player in Ozzy's solo career that I don't think's even ever had himself on the cover of like Guitar World magazine. I mean, even Gus G got a few covers on Guitar World magazine. For guitar players, that's a pretty big thing. And I was reading and prepping for tonight. One of the things he did early on, like back in the '80s, he also played with Lizzie Borden. And I was reading that Lizzie Borden didn't think that Joe Holmes was the right fit for that band. So he Lizzie Borden kind of gave him the boot. And I was just kind of curious, of all the players that played with Ozzy over the years, that he's really probably the most low profile guy, and yet he's also he was kind of in the shadows. He got a little bit of credit there. I think shortly after the Osmosis album, and even people thought that he played on the Osmosis album. But he just did the tour.
He actually played on a song called "Walk on Water."
Okay.
And then pretty much was there for live shows. But an interesting connection with Joe Holmes is that Joe Holmes took guitar lessons from Randy Rhodes back in the day.
See, and that's probably part of the reason he was picked, because I even remember hearing some about that back in the day. That he was a Randy Rhodes.
Yeah, even Ozzy noticed it, saying that he plays Randy's stuff just like Randy. It's like I can see Randy's fingers when he plays.
Yeah, and another thing is, I forget the name of the band, but after he joined left Ozzy's band and quit playing with Ozzy, he put together This Is Joe Holmes, some solo album, and I forget what it was called, but Eddie Trunk went crazy, and a lot of people were saying just what a great album, but it kind of remained under the radar, and probably I should also mention, also before Ozzy, I think going all the way back to '91. David Lee Roth put out this album it was his third solo album. It was called A Little Ain't Enough. And Joe Holmes does not play on the album, but he did the tour because in David Lee Roth's band, he stepped in for Jason Becker, who was very young at the time. And that is when Jason Becker found out he was ill and he could not play guitar anymore. And Joe Holmes was the one that did that tour with David Lee Roth, but again, remained under the radar.
Right. Yeah. The guy probably didn't get enough credit, and he is a really good guitar player. I mean, even getting close to a situation when you're playing with people like Lizzie Borden and Ozzy, you got to be pretty damn good.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, if this is all we ever know Joe Holmes for doing a tour with like David Lee Roth and Ozzy Osbourne and Lizzie Borden, that's a pretty. You're at least got enough of a talent as a player, but you're an interesting little footnote in the history of rock and roll.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But moving past that now, we got a Greek musician by the name of Constantinos, otherwise more popularly known as Gus G.
Yeah, okay,
Now,
yeah.
what I can say about Gus G is I love him. He's a monster guitar player. He's fast. He's precise. He's melodic. He's intricate. He's got great control, and the guy's a phenomenal guitar player. And he didn't really leave much of a stamp with Ozzy, but he did record on the 2010 release Scream.
Yes.
And the guy's just a monster guitar player. He played in Firewing and Dream Evil, one of my favorite classic power metal kind of records, if you will.
Yeah.
The Book of Heavy Metal. So
people tell me
his playing's really good, man.
People tell me I haven't had a chance to check it out, but the band Firewing, I think that's the band he still plays with, and
yeah, you got to check them out, man.
And they put out several albums, I know. So people say if you want to know what that guy's about, check Firewing out because they're still putting out albums.
And check out Dream Evil, The Book of Heavy Metal.
Wow, I will have to do that. And it just makes me kind of wonder because Gus did that one album, and then that's when he went back to like working with Zach, and I just kind of wonder like, is it just because Zach is super popular with everybody? Probably so. Who knows?
Right.
And see, Gus is interesting too because Ozzy never really talks much about him. And he's never said anything real nasty. So I think they split on amicable terms. It's just kind of you don't. And even since he left Ozzy, except when he puts out a new Firewind album, you don't hear too much out from him. But people said that stuff is really worth checking out, which you've kind of just confirmed, Joe.
Oh, yeah, good stuff. And the guy's a phenomenal guitar player. Great tone, great sound, phenomenal playing. I mean, I totally see and totally get it why Ozzy hired him.
I got to ask you, Joe.
Absolutely.
The Ozzy album, I believe it came out just last year. Have you had a chance to hear that?
What's that?
The name is escaping me, but Ozzy put out like a new solo album last year, and I kind of wanted to know. I forget the name of the guitar player, but it's the guy that produced it. It's not really a real well known player, but then he's also got on his last studio album from last year. Slash plays some of the guitar tracks on the album, and Duff plays the bass tracks.
Oh wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and then he does a song. It's called "Ordinary Man." That's the name of the album. His last studio album.
Yeah. I heard that.
And then the title track, "Ordinary Man," it's a pretty good like power rock ballad. But interesting thing, I don't know if you're aware of it. Elton John plays on that song. So,
okay.
So the new Ozzy, probably haven't heard it, but it's worth checking out for those little reasons. And I wanted to ask you, like, a project like that where you have Slash playing some of it, and you get a guy like Duff McKagan to come in and just, play all over the album, his bass tracks. What do you think about, like, Ozzy having, like, just kind of some guys come in and record the album? He might put together, like, a different band to do it live these days.
Well, I mean, Ozzy really doesn't have anything to prove to anybody.
Yeah.
So,
he can do that.
At this point, it's whatever the old man feels like.
Yeah.
I mean? So, we're just lucky to have him still with us. And if he puts out albums or if he plays shows, that's even more of a bonus. But the man has left quite a legacy.
And I will say, Joe,
great musicians and great albums and phenomenal music and memories.
Yeah, I will say this, Joe.
Glad we could do this show.
Yeah, before we wrap it up, but I will say this, a couple more things, because you probably forgot as I was until this just popped in my head. If Ordinary Man is the very last album we ever get from Ozzy, it's maybe not on the level of Blizzard of Oz, but what a great album to go on. Like, could you imagine the final album, you have Slash and Duff playing on the album? And it's a pretty good album if people would kind of give it a fair listen. And again, it's not Blizzard of Oz, but again, people forget that Ozzy, the last few years, he was also diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And if you've seen Ozzy recently, he's getting quite up there. A lot of these aging rockers, and again, who knows how much longer he has. And I think part of the reason, although he didn't announce being diagnosed with Parkinson's until after they played the final Black Sabbath show, but I do think that had something to do with them deciding to kind of call it a day, But you can tell he's kind of starting to shake and stuff. But so who knows how long he's got left? But I mean, what a way to end your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really didn't touch much on this, but the whole idea of Ozfest. Nobody was doing those kind of big festivals like that, and with all these different bands and multiple day festivals. And
well,
so it was kind of a cool idea that he came up with, and I think he helped launch a lot of bands' careers.
Yeah, I mean, also. they've been doing that for years. Like in they have the big European metal festivals, but really that was the first time they did anything like that here in the U.S. And the thing with Ozfest was, it was strictly for metal bands, and that's where, like, I remember when Slipknot first came out, they got on one of the first Ozfest tours, and I think one of the first Ozfest tours was when they had the tour with when Black Sabbath first got back together, and they had like a double headliner on that was you had, I think, Black Sabbath. And that's when Rob Halford first went back to Judas Priest. So that was like one of the biggest Ozfest ever. And then what they kind of made it a yearly event. I don't know when they did the last one, but they had just it was pure like a pure metal fest, And they tried to combine it with kind of the best of the classic metal bands with a lot of the newer bands like Slipknot and that.
Nice. Yeah, in 2007 they offered tickets to fans free of charge, which led to some controversy.
Yeah.
And Ozfest was reduced to a one-day event in Dallas.
Wow.
This is something new on me, and I would have loved to see this. And then Ozzy played with Metallica and King Diamond.
Oh, wow.
That would have been a phenomenal show.
Yeah.
Again, in 2010, Ozzy was the headliner closing the show after opening acts Halford and Motley Crue. That would have been another really good one to see.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to also go back to Jakey Lee. One of the things that people forget, he was a super phenomenal player as we talked about throughout the show. And can you imagine one of the other things with Jake that I don't think any of the other guys over the years really had to deal with? Jakey Lee was the one guy that especially when he first joined Ozzy's band, you had all of these guys like in the audience like, fuck you, Randy,
Yeah.
and could you imagine being on stage and trying to play your gig and people are booing you and they're calling the name of the guy you replaced, which is of course a guy that is unfortunately died tragically young. I mean, imagine those huge. What Jake went through just trying to replace the huge shoes of Randy Rhodes.
Yeah, and again, that's probably part of the reason why, maybe he didn't get the respect that he deserved until years later,
Yeah.
And, he was kind of in the shadows, even though he was right up there on stage.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Jakey Lee.
It was unfair to him to be in that situation in a way, And
I don't know that any other guys could have handled it like he did. He kind of just took it in stride. And the other thing about Jake is he's one of these guys that I have a huge amount of respect, not just because of his talent, but if you've ever heard him talk like during an interview, he kind of really just tells it like it is. He speaks his mind. He doesn't really care what anybody thinks. He's just one of those guys that kind of talks from the heart. So much so that the first thing he did, like after leaving Ozzy's band, he formed this what I think is one of the best things he ever did. That spanned Badlands, probably the very first Badlands album. I mean, it sounds like a lot of that classic, hard rock from the 70s, kind of a combination of like Deep Purple, maybe Bad Company, but a little harder edge. And and they fell apart like after 2 albums. And part of the reason was the lead singer Ray Gillen, another super talented guy. I think him and Jake had a great chemistry together, and what that band could have been. But unfortunately, Ray got sick with AIDS, and he died. And Jay considered like trying to replace Ray, but they just realized it wouldn't really work. And then Jakey Lee kind of disappeared from the music scene for almost like 20 years. And and then
interesting side note on that.
Yeah.
When I met and took lessons and became friends with Robert Mason, Robert Mason got a phone call to an offer to replace Ray.
Wow.
And in Robert's words to me was, "There is no replacing Ray."
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool, the respect that he showed. He could have got that gig and probably been successful, but he told Jake that there is no replacing Ray.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too. Like I said, then after Badlands fell apart, nobody really heard from Jakey Lee for almost 20 years, and then he finally puts out, after 20 years, his first album with his new band. He forms Red Dragon Cartel, and they put out two albums, and they're kind of decent albums, but they're kind of all over the place. And I remember at the time people were asking Jake, like, well, Red Dragon Cartel, it's very different sounding than what you did with Ozzy or what you did with Badlands. And he's like, you know what? I've been away from the scene for 20 years. I didn't come back because I had to. I came back because I wanted. I've been making this album. I wanted people to hear it. I really don't care what people think. He wasn't being being a jerk or anything. He was just kind of saying,
it was a labor of love.
Yeah. And it's kind of
back, which is the right way to be.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's kind of interesting because in this interview I read that he was given, at the time when Red Dragon Cartel first came out, he was talking about I don't do this. If somebody wants to buy my record and they like it, that's great. But I don't make music to please everybody else. I make music to please myself first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, Joe, it's kind of interesting. Every time I talk to you, or even somebody's writing me about what we do with This Is Metal, and there's this guy that is always on, I forget his name, James Davis, I think it is. He's a friend of yours, and he was telling me, you and him go way back, and he was on the This Is Metal Facebook page that we started, a couple of weeks back, and he was telling me years ago that you and him, I forget what, I think he said you and him were like doing a show where you guys were opening up for Armored Saint, and I thought, wow, I got to ask Joe about that.
Yeah. When I was out west, his band, Born of Fire, I think they were called, and the band I was in was called Blind Rage, and so we crossed paths a few times, doing shows together out there, and played with a lot of bands out there, Flotsam and Jetsam, Sacred Reich, Armored Saint, Zach, a lot of different bands come through there. And
oh wow! So
did a lot of shows back in them days,
And how big of an Armored Saint fan were you? And I'm asking because, like, it's a gig for you at the time, but like, that's
you know what? In total honesty, I totally respect them.
Yeah.
But the one song that I really remembered and really loved was "Can You Deliver?"
Okay.
So, other than that, honestly, at the time at least, I wasn't a huge Armored Saint.
Oh, okay. Well,
I knew it was a good gig, but
yeah. And you mentioned,
it was cool. I mean, they were cool to us, and we played with Lizzie Borden out there several times.
Wow. And you mentioned, we rehearsed
in a rehearsal unit with Flotsam and Jetsam, the drummer Greg Hall from Sacred Reich, his band, and Max Cavalera's band Soulfly.
Wow! You played with some interesting.
I've actually partied and don't remember it with Max.
Oh wow! Oh, you got some great rock tales to tell. And you mentioned opening a show for Zach. Would that have been with Black Label?
Again, I think that was before he was doing something there.
Maybe
before he officially. It was Black Label, but it was before he officially called it Black Label.
Because one of the very early albums he did right after leaving Ozzy the first time was this thing called Pride and Glory, and early on the two guys he was working with was James Lomenzo, who of course was a bass player from White Lion, and then later he'd go on to play with Megadeth for several years, and then they had the drummer from White Lion, Greg D'Angelo, but he left early on, and he was I
remember being really intimidated because I was this young, skinny kid.
Yeah.
He was this big, sweaty, hairy Viking dude, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
and he stunk horribly, but I mean, he played great. He was awesome, you know. And he came up he talked to us, and he shook my bass player's hand, and he said. He told my bass player, "Shake my hand like a man, boy."
Yeah, yeah, and you know,
it's just like, yes, sir.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, and you know, so that very first album he put out after Ozzy, I think, was called Pride and Glory, and it was a combination of like southern rock and then real like full blown, almost like Pantera metal, and it was the first time you got to hear Zakk Wylde sing. And before we end this, I just got to note, Zakk, as you know, is a super talented guy. I mean. At that point, when he's putting out that first post-Ozzy album, we find out not only is a man like a masterful lead guitar player, he's a great lead singer. He can play piano. He can kind of he's one of those guys that can do it all, you know. And he can write his own songs. He can sing them. And Zakk is just a super talented guy. And I think of all the guys Ozzy's played with, he's the most capable. I mean, Jakey Lee and all these guys, we're talking great guitar players, but I don't know that Jakey Lee could, sing in the way that Zack's able to. And also the thing is,
all of these guys got their own
thing going,
pitch and their own.
Yeah.
You know, that's why this really is a good segment for This Is Metal, because there's so much talent that came across Ozzy's radar, and so many phenomenal musicians, and the fans are the ones that
matter.
That benefit from that,
because
all the shit that they go through, all the problems and everything that you hear about, years later or whatever. The bottom line is we have this legacy of phenomenal music and great memories of awesome concerts and shows, and and Ozzy's a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And these guitar players, they deserve more respect than sometimes they get.
Yeah, so, and
the Axemen of Oz is is one I'm proud of, because these guys deserve to be talked about, man. Yeah,
before we wrap it up, Joe, I just want to kind of once again talk a little bit about Zakk Wylde, because I mean he's really noteworthy here. And the fact, if you go back to I think it was 1987 when he first joined Ozzy's band. That first, he's replacing Jakey Lee, who's been there for a number of years. But at the time, Zakk is a skinny long-haired kid from New Jersey. Like, I think he was like 19 years old or something at the time, and I mean. He looked like a real pretty boy back then, but like you'll say that was what the look was at that. But to see what Zakk looked like, if you go all the way back, look at some photos from 1987 to what he kind of morphed into. I mean, he was a real skinny kid. Now, he's really a lot buffer, and he's kind of a lot bigger. He's grown this like kind of crazy beard. Totally. If you looked at the two separate pictures, like of Zakk Wylde now, Zakk from like 1980. It looks like two different guys.
The other one looks like the dad.
Yeah, and it's just kind of funny to look at. But I mean, you kind of see the evolution of Zakk Wylde from all the way back in 1987 when he first joined. He's a 19-year-old, unknown kid, to what he would go on to become.
Right.
And so we really have seen the evolution of it. And I like your idea here, Joe, that we did the Axemen of Oz. It's a real original kind of concept, and I think we could talk a lot about a lot of different bands, the Axemen of whatever, but it's kind of a play on words, but probably another guy that I think had a real eye for like guitar talent is Ronnie James Dio.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could do the same thing with him for sure, because of all the ass-kicking guitar players that come across him, and not just guitar players. I mean.
Everybody.
The drummers and bass players and all the musicians that worked with that guy were definitely top notch. Yeah. They had to be.
Oh yeah, even Randy Castillo. He was one of the drummers that played with Ozzy over years. But I mean, he played like, I don't know how many Ozzy albums because I don't have it in front of me. But he played like on The Ultimate Sin. That was his first album. I think he played on No More Tears.
The Rest for the Wicked.
A lot of us. He was there when Zakk Wylde first joined the band, and the thing is, not only was he a drummer, but he was one of these guys that he co-wrote several of those songs from that time with Ozzy. He was a major player with the songwriting. So he died tragically young a a few years back from cancer. So again, Ozzy's outlived a lot of these guys, but they're just as much part of a story as Ozzy is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well,
Ozzy couldn't have done it himself.
Oh yeah, and see that's the thing is when you go all the way back and you start to realize that it is the Ozzy Osbourne band, so of course even if Ozzy doesn't write a lick of music, he's going to get credited with some of the songwriting. But when you go back and you realize and you hear him tell that story about I didn't really know how to write a song until Randy Rhodes taught me. He sat down and he was so patient and he taught me the right way to kind of because I guess going even back to Black Sabbath for years, the way Ozzy would kind of do his vocalizing, he'd kind of like do a scat vocal and kind of just sing like the way it was in his head. But right. Randy really taught him how to write a song.
How to construct it, yeah.
Well, Joe, I enjoy doing this, so I guess next time, next time we'll be talking about George Lynch. So I'll be checking in with you before next week to schedule the day. But thanks for doing this, and take care, my friend.
Likewise. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.